Let's talk about JavaScript. JavaScript. It is a complicated, enormous programming language with lots of flavors, lots of varieties, lots of frameworks, lots of other technicalities in it. There are literally thousands and thousands of JavaScript libraries and different styles of JavaScript. Let's talk about why are there so many names for JavaScript, and how about why are there so many things that just mean somebody does JavaScript. Now, there are reasons for these, but I'm just going to kind of talk about them one at a time. So let's start out with vanilla JavaScript. What does that mean? Vanilla JavaScript means people are just doing JavaScript that ships with the browser. So originally, JavaScript was a browser-based programming language. The whole point of JavaScript was when you had Chrome, well, originally it was Netscape. So when you had your browser, it would download a web page, and if you need to do some kind of scripting, animation, let's say hover states, click events when you click something on a mouse, the whole point of JavaScript was you would use that as a programming language to respond to that kind of stuff. Vanilla JavaScript just means somebody knows the JavaScript that ships with the browser, and it doesn't include any libraries, anything like that. They actually know the fundamental parts of JavaScript. All right, not a framework. Vanilla JavaScript just means plain old parts of the language. All right, how about Node? How about Node or node.js? Node is server-side JavaScript. I believe it came out in 2009. That was about 10 years ago from the date I'm recording this. Node just means JavaScript on the server. So for a long time, JavaScript was just a thing that ran in the browser. Running in the browser is pretty limited. It's like a sandbox. Running on the server means it can run on any computer directly. So Node allowed you to run JavaScript directly on computers. A lot of people were really excited about this, but a lot of people were very suspicious of it because they thought JavaScript was a toy language. They thought it was like a crappy language. They thought it was not serious, Well, as it turned out, you can write very serious stuff. In fact, many large companies, Netflix, LinkedIn, whatever, lots of big companies use Node. But it's a little bit different from the regular JavaScript. So I call myself a Node developer. What that means is I know how to use JavaScript on the server, which there's some additional things, on a computer, directly on a computer, you have a file system. So you can open files, you can read files. You can open processes, so you can create child processes. You can control other programs. What else can you do? You can open direct network connections between other computers. Not that you can't do that from a browser, but you have a lot more control about how you do it in Node. So Node is it's still JavaScript though. It's still JavaScript. It's just like using it in a different context. All right, what about this stuff, ES6, ES 2015, ES7, ES Next, ES whatever? Well, the ES stands for ECMAScript. ECMAScript is a spec. It's like a standard. It's made by a committee. And what happens is they use these new features that come out in these ES releases, and now it's just continuous. It used to be they would have, numeric releases. So ES6 was the last big one. It kind of broke everything because it was so big. And they would release these, and then the browsers adopt these new feature sets. Well, all people are talking about on their resume when they write this ES6 stuff, they're saying, I know the new JavaScript. I know the new features that are coming out. I know all the new stuff. So now people tend to actually talk about individual features like async await. That's a really big one that just came out in JavaScript. And it marks you out as keeping up with things if you know async await, right? Let's talk about frameworks. So I also call myself a React developer. There are a ton of JavaScript frameworks. I'm going to show 10 frameworks on the next slide. And people make jokes about how many frameworks there are. What is a framework? It's just a big collection of JavaScript that helps you do something. So, there's web frameworks for building websites. There are server-side frameworks for building APIs. I'm just going to talk about front-end web frameworks. So we'll talk about like React, Angular, Vue, that kind of stuff. And the big deal about frameworks is this is still just JavaScript. I mean, React has another language inside of it called JSX. You know, some of these other ones have templating languages like that. But basically, you're writing JavaScript. So you need to be good at JavaScript to do React. And the other thing that happens with JavaScript, and especially these big frameworks because they're so complex, is, you know, when I do React, I've been doing React for maybe 4 years now, almost, maybe 3 years. I can't remember exactly. I've been doing it since it like just came out of beta, basically. And React, there are so many libraries for it, and there's so much complexity. And React especially does not ship with anything like Angular does. So you have to add your own router. You have to add your own form handling stuff. All of these libraries that help you do all the basic stuff you need in a website, you have to add them in React. And that makes it very complex to learn. So much so that I am very productive with React at this point, and I know it very well, and I can spin up and ship a big site quickly with React. I'm not going to switch to Angular. So I call myself a React developer. I would not even respond to Angular jobs, even though I'm a good JavaScript developer. I could pick up Angular if I needed to. I'm not going to. So I think as a recruiter, you probably need to understand people get specialized, and I mean the better they are, probably the more specialized they get, just because it makes a lot of sense. Like it only makes sense for me to go after React jobs and really just keep learning the React ecosystem. And React comes out with stuff all the time. Like they just shipped hooks, you know, a few months ago. Hooks was a big game changer. I mean that really changed a lot of the paradigms people were using, and you know, keeping up with that stuff is a big deal. And then, not to mention all of the libraries that you're going to use that need to be updated. So now everybody, for a while people were using Redux with React, and now the new hot thing is using Apollo link state, using GraphQL, using that Apollo stack. And, you know, if I was going to do a new site, hell yeah, I'm going to do that if I can do a GraphQL server on the back end. Like, I don't want to do Redux anymore because being able to use GraphQL is pretty cool, and Apollo link state really solves the state situation pretty nicely, in my opinion. So people get into that, and they get very opinionated about how these things are going to work. Let's talk about NPM. So you probably see NPM on resumes. You probably see mention of node modules, JavaScript modules, NPM modules, whatever, stuff like that. Packages, maybe they say packages. You probably know about GitHub, right? So GitHub is open source project management, or I guess it's open source code management, source code storage. Git is a version control system. On top of that, they build GitHub, which is like a web interface into Git, and it lets you collaborate and store source code. Well, what happens is when you build that source code, you need to share it, right? So you actually share a finished product of it's going to be like a library, right? It's going to be compiled code, maybe it's going to be transpiled or some formatted somehow. Well, the way you share that is you publish it to a package manager, and it just so happens that the very popular one for JavaScript is NPM. Although now they're starting to be competitors, but NPM is where people are publishing all their JavaScript code. NPM, I don't know how many packages they have, but it's probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And I like to talk about on my resume, you know, here's my NPM profile. Here's the packages I've published. You know, here's how many downloads they have. They don't have a lot, by the way. A lot of them are just small things. But, you know, I have about a dozen packages I've published, and I think that marks me out as a good developer that can, you know, understands how the process of publishing modules goes. I can share code, and people can use the code that I've shared. And, like, you know, it's good enough that somebody can actually use it in a real production project, and I'll maintain it, and, you know, the code's good. So the point is, people write about modules, and people write about NPM. And I think if people are writing about that in their resume, it's marking them as a good developer and probably like a strong open source developer. So that's what that is. But that's still just talking about sharing JavaScript code. And by the way, NPM is for sharing node modules, and you might think, well, node's only on the server side. That's not true anymore, because now you're using node to build web applications. So when you use React, you're actually probably using node to build the React application. Now you're not shipping you're shipping a JavaScript bundle to the client side, but you are using Node during the build process. And so all those things are coming from NPM. You're getting React out of NPM. All right. So one downside of NPM is that there are a pile of packages. So there's a weird thing where maybe if you install one package, it installs like 300 dependencies. It's just kind of like a reputation. That's another reason people, make fun of NPM or make fun of JavaScript, is because it's so fragmented and there's so many dependencies and the ecosystem's kind of a mess. So it's not a super great marker that somebody has published an NPM module, because anybody can publish an NPM module. It's very easy. I could teach you how to do it in 10 minutes. But I think if they have a bunch and people are using them, that's a good sign that somebody's a good open source developer. So in summary, JavaScript's pretty hard just because of how much fragmentation there is, how confusing it is, how many contexts it can be used in. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope you like this video. Drop me a comment if you want some other kind of stuff like this. Smash the like button, whatever the cool people are saying these days. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.